Welcome to everyone. On behalf of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, I'm really happy to welcome all of you to this side event. Is the sound okay? Jamie,
It's a bit low.
Okay. Is it better now?
Yes.
No, it's better.
Thank you.
It's better, yeah.
Thank you very much. So welcome again to everyone. Really very happy to see you around this virtual table. And we organize this event with the aim of inviting experts to share information and experiences on what has been shown to work in reducing reoffending around the world. As we know, preventing reoffending is one of the core objectives of criminal justice systems. It leads to less victims and increases public safety. Efforts to reduce reoffending require a multifaceted approach, including fair sentencing policies, a rational use of non-custodial measures, the provision of effective rehabilitation and social reintegration programs in prison, and more importantly, in the community. Existing standards and norms in crime prevention and criminal justice offer important principles and guidelines relevant to reducing reoffending. And there I would like to mention in particular the standard minimum rules for the treatment of prisoners, the Nelson Mandela rules, the UN standard minimum rules on non-custodial measures or Tokyo rules, as well as the UN rules for the treatment of women offenders and non-custodial measures for women prisoners, Bangkok rules. The international community's commitment to reducing reoffending was one of the main commitments expressed at the 14th UN Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, which was held in Kyoto in March 2021. It is firmly reflected in the Kyoto Declaration, which is the outcome document of the Crime Congress. At the Kyoto Congress, member states identified the need to exchange information on national experiences of efforts to reduce reoffending. They also stress the need for practical guidance for policymakers and criminal justice practitioners. Responding to such momentum, in December 2021, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution titled on reducing reoffending through rehabilitation and reintegration. The resolution encourages member states to develop comprehensive strategies to reduce reoffending, and it requests UNODC to convene an expert group meeting to discuss promising practices with a view to identifying elements that may be considered by member states in developing model strategies on reducing reoffending. And the resolution indicates that those model strategies would become one of the UN standards and norms in crime prevention and criminal justice. Pursuant to this request, UNODC convened in April 2022 a meeting of experts from relevant sectors, the judiciary, prison administrations, probation services, and other community services, policymakers, researchers in criminology, in sociology, and those experts came from all regions of the world. The deliberations of this meeting are before the Commission at this session in a document conference room paper number 4, and this can be found on the Crime Commission website. At the present session of the Commission, a draft resolution entitled again Reducing Reoffending through Rehabilitation and Reintegration is currently under discussion. So this is the background against which this event is being held. And this event has been intended to provide an additional opportunity to explore and learn more about measures that can reduce reoffending. So once again, thank you very much for joining us in this side event. And we have several distinguished experts in this area. Most of them participated in the expert consultations in April, and we are very happy to have them here again today with us to share with all of us some of the interesting inputs they made in the expert consultations. So now I would like to invite our first speaker, Mrs. Ayaka Takai, who is a professor at the United Nations Asia and Far East Institute for the Prevention of Crime and the Treatment of Offenders, UNAFE. Professor Takai, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Levold. Let me share my slides first. Okay. I hope everyone can see my slides. Okay. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and konnichiwa from Japan. My name is Ayaka Takai. Thank you so much for this opportunity today. UNAFE, where I'm a professor, was established in 1962 by an agreement between the United Nations and the government of Japan. UNAFE is fully staffed and funded by the Ministry of Justice of Japan. So today I'm here to introduce Japanese approaches to reducing reoffending, which I think are worth being incorporated into the model strategies which are being developed by the UNODC. Okay. Sorry for that. Let me start with a quote. It is obvious that the increase of the number of prisoners has been caused, among other things, by the increase of repeat offenders. Therefore, it is clear that the number of prisoners will decrease if we now have a way to prevent recidivism. Can you guess whose words they are and when they were spoken? Maybe the Minister of Justice of Japan currently, maybe during the Kyoto Crime Congress last year. No, these words were spoken 134 years ago by Mr. Kimpera Meizen, a Japanese citizen who pioneered community-based offender rehabilitation in Japan. Reducing reoffending is not a new challenge, but an issue that our society has been facing and working on for a very, very long period of time. Kimpera Meizen was an entrepreneur in the 19th century Japan. It was a time when modern civilization had just begun and the government had little financial resources to spare. So it was private sector entrepreneurs who invested in public projects, including education, healthcare, as well as offender rehabilitation in that period. He also said, I would like to support the released prisoners who are vulnerable, and if we can get them back into society and put them to work, we will promote their well-being and thus maintain the peace and well-being of our society. Then, in 1888, he established an organization with his financial partners to support released prisoners and appointed 1,700 volunteers to work with him. This is the origin of Japan's volunteer probation officer system, which we call the Hogoshi system in Japanese. The Hogoshi system is what I would like to share with you today. as an old approach with long history of reducing reoffending in Japan. It initially started with community volunteers appointed by a private organization, but now it's fully established as a part of the statutory offender rehabilitation system in Japan. Hogoshi are student volunteers who support the rehabilitation of offenders in the community by working with professional probation officers and are commissioned by the Minister of Justice based on the Volunteer Probation Officers Act. As they are not paid for their work, they are not motivated by the money, but by compassion for the client and for their community. Here's how Hogoshi contributes to the offender rehabilitation and reintegration. They empower the individual client by providing practical advice and support with warm consideration, showing that they accept the client in their community. And then they empower the community where the client and Hogoshi both live through developing resources and creating networks to address the client's complex needs. Also, they empower the whole community by raising awareness of the importance of offender rehabilitation, acceptance of offenders in the community, and making their community inclusive. Based on the long history of the Hogoshi system and its contribution to community corrections for over 130 years, I would propose to recognize the valuable role that Hogoshi have played in Japanese society and to celebrate the involvement of community volunteers supporting offender reintegration worldwide in order to reduce reoffending. Now, stepping away from the traditional approach, I will introduce a new initiative. We are now coming to realize that reducing reoffending cannot be achieved by criminal justice agencies alone. This is because we know the challenges that offenders face are diverse and complex, and they require the involvement of a wide variety of professional agencies to deal with those challenges. In order to address this issue, Japan has adopted a new initiative that ensures a multi-stakeholder approach to support offender rehabilitation. The Japanese government developed a national action plan for preventing reoffending in 2017 by the initiative of the Ministry of Justice, but in collaboration with other ministries such as the Ministries of Education, Health, Welfare, Agriculture, Economy, and Land, as well as the National Police Agency. The plan provides a comprehensive strategy and is grounded with 5 basic principles and states 7 major challenges, as you can see on the slide. It highlights securing close coordination and cooperation between the state and the local governments and private sector organizations, identifying the roles of each ministry and agency. This plan has clarified the roles of each agency and made each agency more aware of its responsibilities on reducing reoffending. With the development of this plan, multi-agency collaboration has been further promoted in the field of rehabilitation. I thank you so much for your kind attention, and I hope we can get our collective wisdom into the model strategies on reducing reoffending. And I look forward to hearing more ideas from other presenters later on during this event. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Takai. That was really interesting to hear about old as well as new approaches to reducing reoffending in Japan, in particular the Hogoshi system and the multi-agency cooperation approach. Thank you very much. And now I'm happy to give the floor to our second speaker, Mr. Clément Okej, who is Deputy Director of the Probation and Aftercare Service in Kenya. Mr. Okej, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Valerie, and thank you so much, Eke, for your insights, which we have also borrowed from. Like you know, Kenya also has a volunteer probation system, which we borrowed from Japan. But this afternoon, I'm going to zero in on where we came from and what exactly that we are doing that contributes to reducing reoffending among our offending population. And this population are spread across those who serve probation orders, those who are under community supervision, and those who are exiting from penal facilities, but basically coming for voluntary supervision or voluntary support, not statutory. As you may know, or you may not know, that Kenya does not have a parole system per se. And therefore, those who exit penal institutions, especially the long-term prisoners, may come to the department for what we call social reintegration support. Now, probation system in Kenya has been with us for 7 decades, and within the 7 decades, we must say that the law that the colonialists handed over to us is basically still the same, and it is good for us because that law principally deals more with compliance supervision of the court orders. But we made changes to that law recently in 2018 when we injected some element of professional rehabilitation in it. In other words, trying to inform the sentencers and the court system of the needs that needs to be addressed on any offender that is given to us by the courts. Now, probation system in Kenya has a very strong social work orientation. And for us, that gives us the latitude to mold the offenders who are coming under supervision in the best way we can, based on the assessments and the casework model that we shall identify for each client. And in this regard, that has helped probation system in Kenya over those 7 decades to develop its own culture and identity and professionalism. And because we've never had any breakage in terms of probation not existing, in Kenya, and I think in Africa, we may be the only country which has that kind of span of control of probation work. Probation work in Kenya is a national service, and therefore centrally driven with the policies that cut across all regions in the country. And that means, therefore, that operational manuals, which are developed for respective client typologies, are then spread across every region. Now, I must say that the probation work that we've been able to do has been well supported by the professional, or rather the officers who are employed into the service. Most of them have social work training or social science training, making it easier for them to understand the philosophies around behavioral issues of offenders. And therefore, those who have done social work, those who have done psychology, those are the ones that are mostly employed, although in the recent past, because of employment issues, we have seen other category of social scientists, those who have had social science training coming into the department. The type of work that we do with clients and which we see working for us, I would call it the structured professional supervision. And in this case, we are talking about supervision subsequent to assessment. Previously, the social work diagnosis that we were doing may not have been the best, although it had some strengths in it. Then we were using the SWOT analysis method, where for each offender, we were able to identify the strength within that offender, identifying the weaknesses within that offender, identifying the opportunities that may be available surrounding that offender within the family and the community, and also identifying the threats that would disable that offender from proceeding well during supervision. But new dimensions have come in. We are now able to employ the evidence-based assessment, and now we are using various tools according to the client typologies. We have developed and domesticated, should I say, we have domesticated assessment tools which speak to youth. We have developed assessment tools that speak to violent extremists, And we have also developed a generic tool that speaks to the wider majority of the offenders under our supervision. And may I say that the sentencing that is given to offenders does not principally define the kind of rehabilitation that one offender has to go through, but rather it gives the probation officer the latitude to be able to carry out assessment and identify. And I want to say that, and I want to give one practical experiment which has worked with us over the years. I think I've blessed with some 2 or 3 minutes, that we were able to carry out an experiment where we involved all the key stakeholders in building their knowledge and consciousness about the client typologies that we are having. We were able to train a category of offenders in entrepreneurship. Later on, we were able to provide them with empowerment tools, being able to give them the technical tools that they need after they have done their training either in the penitentiaries. And these were particularly those who have been able to leave the facility prisons and then be able to provide it with a probation aftercare supervision. And the result was that 70% of these clients have never gone back to crime, which means the supervision that we provided, the tools that we gave them a livelihood, because a majority of them actually had committed offenses against, rather than to point to their inadequacies, their economic inadequacies and social inhibitions. And during this time, probation officers were also continuing with their own casework, approaches with them, which has given us those results. May I say that other new dimensions which have come on board include now the probation work, pretrial work. And that is giving us a lot of challenge because the courts seem to be interested in us supporting them to write what you call bail information reports to be able to identify those who would be able to hear their cases out in the community. The result of that is that we want to try and reduce the use of custody or remand custody, which again is also in a way bringing more offenders into the system, and that we are finding it very helpful. The other new dimension which we have brought on board is ensuring that all our operational manuals have now embedded human rights approaches in them, and have also been able to embed all the gender responsive and gender responsive ingredient. We are now reviewing all our guidelines, and we're reviewing all operational manuals, including SOPs, to ensure that they conform to human rights and gender-based responses. And that we think is going to give us more and better results. May I stop there for now, because I was just giving an overview of the kind of work that we do with offenders in this country. Thank you so much, Valerie.
Thank you very much, Clément. That was extremely interesting to hear about the evolution of the probation system in Kenya over 7 decades, from just compliance supervision to broad support, in particular by social workers. Also, the information you provided on assessment methodologies was very interesting and I think useful for the future model strategies. And also these aspects of post-penal support and now pre-trial interventions by the probation system. Thanks a lot, a very rich presentation. And now I am happy to turn to the third speaker, Ms. Thais Schilling-Ferraz, who is federal judge in the Federal Court of Appeals in the 4th region in Brazil, as well as active within the Prison System Monitoring Department within the National Council of Justice of Brazil. Ms. Ferraz, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I will first share my presentation, so it's going to be easy. That's okay? Greetings, everyone. At first, I would like to thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to share experiences in this important event. In my presentation, I will address outcomes and efforts being made to build and implement policies aimed at reducing reoffending in Brazil. The National Council of Justice, the institution that is accountable for monitoring and defining the policies and goals of the judiciary branch, is working now in partnership with the Ministry of Justice and Public Security and with United Nations Development Programme on the Doing Justice program. This innovative strategy is organized in 3 dimensions that embrace 28 specific actions to improve the criminal system in Brazil regarding to adults and young offenders. These 3 main dimensions are the entrance door of the criminal system, the liability measures, and the exit door of the system. I will briefly talk about some actions linked to these 3 dimensions, which are based on evidences. An important assumption of judicial policy was defined, although arresting people in several cases is necessary in the medium and long term, this measure increases criminality and violence inside and outside prison, including reoffending. We have research showing that at least 42% of people who have been arrested go back to prison. In addition, it produces social side effects. There is also a consensus that the offender's rehabilitation must be promoted during all steps of the criminal process, and that public policies in the penal system must be coherent with each other. Initiatives within the judiciary and between judges, Congress, and the government must not be contradictory. Otherwise, they will have effects nullified when put into practice. Brazil currently has about 800,000 people in the prison system. We experience overcrowding and human rights violation in many aspects in the custodial facilities. Thus, it is important to focus at the gateway and the possibility of using alternatives to pretrial detention and to the custodial sentences themselves. So we have adopted the detention control hearings as a mandatory practice. This kind of hearing must be held shortly after an arrest. The prisoner is presented directly to the judge, who examines in a very specific way the need for pretrial detention. This policy is being continuously improved and evaluated in a partnership between the National Council of Justice and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And it was already contributed to a 7% reduction in pretrial detentions. At the same time, the offenders and their families were referred to social programs. In the second dimension, the liability measures. During the serving time in prisons, there are some actions aimed at qualifying the prison environment itself, like periodic inspections of custodial facilities carried out by judges and prosecutors, and a computer systems that helps with vacancy management to prevent overcrowding and stimulate alternatives to prison or review the need for prison. One of the most important challenges faced at custodial environment is to offer prisoners job and education opportunities. Important research has brought evidence that they want to work and they want to provide their families with incomes. Here in Brazil, we have some incentives for the private sector in providing jobs inside and outside of custodial environment. For example, when a company creates its facilities inside the prisons, this company doesn't pay some taxes or pay for the rent about the space in use. There's also actions preparing people to leave the custodial environment and actions preventing this period from increasing feelings of exclusion and revenge. Restorative justice projects have been implemented, widespread and monitored, as well as other practices that ensure that offenders are heard, giving them the opportunity to speak and to listen, and also to reflect on their actions, becoming accountable and somehow admitting and repairing damages, since reinforced autonomy and self-determination is essential to prevent recidivism. There is also a new look at the victims at the criminal justice, as the criminal justice generally listen to the victims to obtain information for the offender's conviction. There are little opportunities to hear their pain and their real needs, which also generates many indirect victims. It is wrongly assumed that the victims will overcome all the harm suffered if the offender is punished. Out of this lack of attention, other forms of violence are born. Finally, in the dimension of the exit door, among several actions, I will point out the consolidation and spreading of social offices, innovative structures that have been installed already in 19 states of the Federation. These offices are dedicated to the care of people released from the prison system. They articulate a network of institutions at local level for professional education, search for jobs, and family support on joining social policies of employment, income, and health. Some of these actions already take place before the releasing. I brought here some initiatives that point out to very significant change taking place in Brazil, assuming the insufficiency of mechanisms to repress crime, especially prison, and becoming aware that the true role of the justice system as an instrument of social pacification. Such changes are taking place under the leadership of the National Council of Justice in partnership with several stakeholders, and their execution has also been possible by the performance of the Judicial School, which provide education programs in various areas and produce reflections, qualified knowledge, and research on the phenomenon of criminality and the role of criminal system. Thank you again for your attention. I hope I have contributed to the debate on the topic of reoffending. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Thais. Indeed, you have made a wonderful contribution. I was particularly interested in the way you articulated this entry point, exit point, and rehabilitation in the middle. I even think this could also be the structure for the future model strategies. And also your sharing the practices with regards to restorative justice within the prison environment, the importance of taking into account the needs of victims and having offenders understand those needs, and this practice of, if I understand correctly, one-stop shops of social offices, having this network across the country, providing health, job, education services consolidated in one provider. I think this is also a very promising practice. So thank you again, and for this very interesting contribution. And now I would like to go to our fourth speaker, Mr. Marcus Roches, who is Associate Director in the Court Services and Offender Supervision Agency in Washington, D.C., USA. Mr. Roches, you have the floor.
Thank you, ma'am. Greatly appreciate it. And thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. And I hope it resonates what we're doing in the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. So let me give you a backdrop, a little bit about our criminal justice system here in Washington, D.C. I work for Court Services and Offender Supervision Agency. We have a staff of about 700 people. 400 are charged with supervision. We have approximately 6,000 to 7,000 under adult supervision. And I want to make it clear, it's adult. So whether it's supervision, post-release from the courts, or from our United States Parole Commission, that's what we're responsible for. I say this, we look at the topic of what works for reoffending, and I'm a firm believer we know what works. I think there's bodies of work, there's evidence that we know what works. What I've discovered in my 30 years in the business is not knowing how do you implement what works and how do you implement it in a way to get the best possible outcomes. Because I don't think we can say that we don't know. I can tell you early in my career, I didn't know. And I can tell you that we've done some things early in my career that I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe we did that, because we didn't. But the evidence has been growing expeditiously in years. So we do know what works with reoffending. It's on us as leaders of these criminal justice agencies to learn how to implement to get the best possible outcomes. So let me give you a story real quick, and then I'll tell you what we're doing on the whole notion of creating different pathways for success. So we have a program, and it's everybody's a day reporting center, and we call ours our engagement and achievement centers, because once again, what's in the name? If we want people to be successful, we have to name it successful. So to say day reporting isn't really tied to us. So it's engagement and achievement, and we try to have graduations for everything. So on this particular day, we had a young individual, 18 years old. He was graduating from a cognitive behavioral intervention program. And we like to celebrate him, but we also like to celebrate the family, because it's very important that the family is involved in that process. So we have this graduation. He completes it. And afterwards, while we're walking and talking, he was telling me that he would love to get a CDL license. And that means that's a license to drive a truck. We did discover that he had a driver's license, but in saying this is what he wanted to do. So we have this great vocational opportunity that I will talk about in a minute, and with an opportunity to actually give him that opportunity. So we set him up for an interview with his trucking company, and he goes to the interview. He doesn't show up. It's 10 o'clock. He doesn't show up. And I'm wondering, why didn't he show up? So in years past, we would just wrote him off. Well, in our new pathway process, we went to go pick him up. So we went to pick him up. We knocked on his door. He was sleeping. We got him dressed. He got dressed. He went to the interview. So that Saturday, with another program, he was there. And I asked him this simple question. Man, why didn't you show up? Well, you said you wanted this. We were able to provide this for you. Why didn't you show up? And he looked at me and said, I didn't trust y'all. I didn't believe anything you said. I didn't believe anything anybody said. Do you know how long systems have been telling me that they're going to do this and do that, and they don't do it? He was distrustful of the system. And I guarantee you, most of you feel the same way. If people are distrustful of the work that we do, even though our intentions are great, there are times where we sell these dreams that don't exist. And you may think, okay, this is cheesy, and it could, but I had an aha moment on that. We can create all these pathways. We can talk about cognitive behavioral strategies. We can talk about supervision. We could talk about GPS. We could talk about the whole gamut of what we offer. But if we're not building trust and hope in people, we're missing the point. Because all those things are just tangible things. So for me, our pathways really start at the bottom of how we can create trust and hope in people so they can have successful outcomes. And that's where we started. So when we talk about pathways, I will give you a couple different pathways of what we use here in Washington, D.C. It really based on the premise of hope and trust. Now, in our city, unfortunately, it's terrible news. We have 70 homicides this year, and we're living in very violent times in the United States of America. You can just look at the news, and you saw what happened in Buffalo, New York over the weekend with the readily available of guns and things like that. And we're having a younger population that are doing it. How do I create hope and trust within a younger population that all they see is violence, violence, violence? So this is how it starts, us creating pathways. It starts by this. Just like all of you, we have risk levels. So we go from intense, max, medium, and low. We do nothing with our low risk population. The evidence is pretty clear that they want to self-correct. They're pro-social. We support and guide from afar. And in most cases, I really wish they weren't on supervision, but I don't control that process. Our pathways really start at the medium supervision level and really go to the individual is, what do you need to succeed? Now, here's the thing. Our staff, and we had to change this, and I'm going to tell you something, and I hope you don't get offended when I say this. We change nothing as officers. As leaders in this business, we really don't have the ability to change anything. Our greatest strength is showing people the pathway and helping them walk through that pathway. Because for years, and one of the biggest mistakes I've ever made was being directive, thinking that my pro-social directness is going to take an anti-social person and make them better. It did not. It probably made them worse. It made me even angrier, to make me do things and put people back in prison because they don't get it. They don't get it because it's not my walk. It is their walk. So the first thing I tell staff when we talk about pathways is, you're not as powerful as you think you are. And what we need you to do is take a step back, have the offender client choose their pathway and support and guide them along the process. So we do a lot of things that are on parallel tracks. I'm a firm 100% believer in cognitive behavioral strategies to get to those thinking errors that are driving that behavior. From there, we can do anger management, we can do trauma and grief, loss, we can do all those things. Because in the city of DC, where you have such a violent city, PTSD among our population is huge. Because imagine this, if you're living in a neighborhood and all you hear are gunshots every single night, or you see the ramifications of that every single night, you have to be able to deal with that individual in a way that allows them to get that out. And what we've also discovered is the behavioral health, the mental health aspect of our clients is huge. So we use mental health, cognitive behavioral strategies on parallel tracks on all our pathways. That is the root of all our pathways. Now, what do I mean by pathways? Well, some of our people, you can tell them to this group and they won't want to do it because guess what? It doesn't line up for them. But as in America and everywhere else, everybody wants to be a music star or they want to be a rap star and they can't rap a lick. So we've created these things called like Easy Music Street Academy, in which we take our young population who think they can rap and we put them in this program. Now here's the clicker. To be in this program, they have to be compliant with everything else. So they will love to go to the music academy and get in the room and do art therapy and rap. They will love doing that. But if I'm talking about feelings and cognitive behavioral strategies, I don't want to do that so much. What we discovered, when we give them what they want, we get what we want. So it's us working together. So yes, you can go here, but you have to also do this. And they're like, oh yeah, I'll do it. So now we have them on that level. Then we take it to vocational and we do job assessments. What type of career and job are you interested in? So we create these vocational opportunities for them that gives them certifications that leads to full-time employment. And all of these are on parallel tracks. Here's the thing, and this is the gift. I call it crime interruption. We have them so busy doing things that they want to do and some things that they don't want to do, there is very little time for crime. We keep them busy. So whether it's our Music Street Academy, whether it's our Culinary Arts Boot Camp, whether it's fire extinguisher, every different pathway we create for people that are interested in doing different things with the hope of them being successful. And that's what we'll be able to package in a nice small package, but it's individually based. So I go back to my earlier statement. We know what we can do to reduce reoffending. We just have to do it. And it's really not about us. It's about meeting the individual where they are, giving them what they need. And the last thing I'll tell you is this. By doing that, we're building trust and hope in people who really didn't have it at all, especially within our system. I mean, so we do a lot of exit surveys and we do a lot of assessments to see how we're doing. and the feedback has been very favorable. So for me, for us to continue to reduce reoffending, for me, is to expand our pathways, meet the individual, see what the needs are, and use all these parallel tracks from interventions, supervision, everything that we do, working together to produce the best possible outcomes ever. So with that, I just want to say thank you for this time, and you can chat me questions or anything else, or they have my contact information. I would love to talk to anybody about it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hodges. I think I speak for everyone saying that we could listen to you for hours. It was really extremely interesting to hear the practical insights that you have and through your day-to-day work with offenders, to see how it's grounded in a solid humanism and above all a knowledge of human beings, seeing where they stand and lifting them, so to say, from there, addressing their needs. A lot of interesting insights on using, for instance, this music academy. It could be, I suppose, sports also, or other means to reach the result that you are aiming at. And really thank you very much. I think we have got a lot of inspiration, and also setting the objectives clearly as building trust and keeping hope and giving hope. So thank you very much for that. And now I would like to go to our next speaker, Ms. Edith Tors. She's the Executive Director of the European Forum for Restorative Justice. Ms. Tors, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Good? Okay. Yes, it was really, I think, a lot of moments in the previous speeches when I think what I would like to share and say is really resonating. Thank you very much for the invitation to join this distinguished panel. My name is Edith Tors, and I come from the European Forum for Restorative Justice. That is the leading European network of more than 400 members working for the development of restorative justice in Europe in the areas of policy, research, practice, standards building, and trainings. I don't think that for this audience I have to introduce restorative justice, and there are also many definitions of that, but I think the most important elements of restorative justice, at least in our way of thinking, is that it's a process based on active participation of the victim and the offender, and it focuses on the harm and the reparation of the harm through a dialogue process that is led by an impartial third party or facilitator, as it's called. I think in the basic formats, you can think of victim offender mediation, conferencing, and circles. I think these are the most prevalent formats of restorative justice practices. I think what is important that it's not per definition a process, but I think it is restorative justice because of certain basic principles that appear in the practice. And the most important ones are voluntariness, confidentiality, or the help of this to create a safe space for the dialogue to happen, a neutral or multi-partial facilitator, but non-judgmental is a key word here as well, encouraging a respectful and open dialogue, and also focusing on restoration, but not only restoration of the harm done to the victim, but also restoration of human connections. And this is really important. The European Forum for Restorative Justice 8 years ago conducted a research on desistance and restorative justice. And what we saw there, that research usually supports the finding that at least restorative justice won't make it worse for the offenders. In certain studies, there's no significant change in reoffending rates, but in most of the studies, there is a reduction of reoffending rates for those offenders who participated in restorative justice processes. What we saw on the qualitative part of this research is that actually restorative process can be very supportive of a process of transition or transformation that began already. And that's why I would like to argue that restorative practices added to probation and prison would be very helpful to prevent reoffending. I would like also to say what are the factors of restorative justice that help the desistance project or help to reduce reoffending. First of all, it's non-judgmental character. And I think the fact that it's a non-stigmatizing process. The focus is on the harm and on the needs of the victim, but it's not labeling the person. And it's important for victims as well. They are not stuck in their role of offender and victim, and that can help the offender to change the way they think about themselves. Also, it brings together and focuses on the possibilities in the person in how to provide restitution. Active participation. The offender is not subject or object of the process, but they have an active say in the process and also in the outcome of it. The voluntariness is really important from this respect. Through a restorative dialogue, which doesn't have to be a real meeting, but at least a communication with the victim, the offender has to face the real impact of the crime that was and the harm that caused for the victim, which is sometimes really a breakthrough for offenders to see the real consequences of their deeds. They can also reflect on the harm that their behavior caused in their own circles, in their own family, and they can also see, or it can help the transformation to a more pro-social life. In different practices where community is involved, then also community can provide a protecting factor, and they can have also a role in the agreement or in the monitoring of the agreement. If you talk about agreements, as I said, it's not only compensation towards the victim, but very often for the request of the victim or the community, agreements can contain elements or actions that prevent reoffending or to minimize criminogenic factors. And very often the victim asks for these, that the offender follows therapy or follows a course or at least reports regularly, sometimes even to the victim on their progress in their personal development. And this kind of care from the victim side can be also very supportive of the transformation of the offender. What we don't really refer to in Europe as much, but I think very often a restorative dialogue or process is experienced as a sort of ritual, and it can also help to mark a transition in a person's life and make it more outstanding and as an experience that they can go back to and have power from. Just to conclude that I see a lot of potentials of restorative practices related to probation and prison work, and we see pilots or programs such as in Brazil mentioned. It can be part of creating the individual probation plan of the offender. It can be linked to different victim awareness programs, often involving surrogate victims, for example. It can be part of planning of community service or unpaid work, where is often managed by the probation services. It can help to plan a reintegration plan of prisoners. Family group conferencing can help to rebuild supportive family connections before release. We know the circles of support and accountability that are community involvement to help the reintegration and desistance of sexual offenders. Very important that prison systems also help and facilitate restorative justice meetings with the victims happen in prison, and also provide support for the prisoners after these kind of meetings, which are quite challenging, I think. And as a final dream or goal, but also this is mentioned already in the Council of Europe recommendation on restorative justice, a whole prison culture or climate can turn into restorative, dealing with conflicts in general in a restorative matters. And that can also reduce in general the risk of institutional violence and the criminogenic factors of any institution. Finally, I would like to say that restorative justice is also beneficial for victims and supports their recovery and healing process. And we know that unresolved trauma may lead to offending behavior. And in this way, more wide use of restorative justice is also supporting crime prevention from the victim's side as well. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that these small ideas can inspire the work towards reducing reoffending. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Tersch. And thank you for reminding us of the principles and features of restorative justice and pointing so clearly to the potential it has to support desistance from crime and the way it can be integrated at different stages of the criminal justice process within prisons during the probation interventions. So many very interesting points, and I hope again that this knowledge and evidence that you have shared will make its way into the model strategies. Thank you. And finally, I am happy to give the floor to UNODC colleague, Anya Bousse, who is Program Officer within the Prevention, Treatment and Rehabilitation section in UNODC, and she will be, so I give her the floor. That's better than
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Valerie, and also thanks to all the previous speakers for the really interesting and thought-provoking presentations. And maybe, so you will see, I will speak about maybe a special group of people in contact with the criminal justice system, which would be people with drug use disorders. And in that sense, also let me really echo very much what some of the previous speakers have said about the importance of considering mental health and mental health diagnoses, as well as the role of alternatives to imprisonment and non-custodial alternatives that were mentioned before. So just very quickly, I mean, as some of you may know, UNODC produces a World Drug Report, and we estimate that worldwide around 35 million people suffer from drug dependence and would be in need of treatment of drug use disorders, but only 1 in 8 of those has access to any form of drug dependence treatment. So we leave 7 in 8 people without any access to services for their drug dependence at global level. And then at the same time, we know that many people with a drug use disorder get in contact with the criminal justice system at some point in their lives, or vice versa. Many people in the criminal justice system have a history of drug use or drug use disorders, and the estimates vary depending on the study, but it can be up to, let's say, 50% plus kind of in prison settings. So, and again, maybe no surprise that treatment of drug use disorders has proven to be an effective public health strategy. And what means effective treatment we have summarized in international standards for treatment of drug use disorders and has been demonstrated in multiple, including long-term studies like the ATOS study here from Australia that followed people up over 11 years. But I mean, and this now gets closer to the topic of our event today. Treatment can also improve quality of life and benefit the community, including in dimensions that many of you have mentioned, to reduce the, to bring up the employment rate, reduce the use of welfare, reduce the rate of homelessness, and obviously also reduce drug use. Treatment of drug use disorders also has proven to be an effective public safety strategy. So these are all data from the US that have shown how being in treatment can reduce the chance that someone will be involved in criminal activities, for example, selling of drugs, shoplifting. The arrests kind of went down, or being supported by income from illegal activities, also that rate went down. And on a more general level, it could be shown that investments in treatment of drug use disorders were associated with a drop in in violence crime rates in the communities. So these are kind of from some very, very early on studies on pharmacological treatment of drug use disorders
this kind of that already showed that there are reductions in arrests in one study, reductions in reincarceration in one of these really, let's say, old classical studies on pharmacological treatment for opioid use disorders, but also kind of in newer studies. This is a Lancet publication from 2019. It could be shown that opioid agonist treatment was associated with especially an initial benefit in delaying the time to being charged first and reducing the total charge days. But what was important is to keep people in treatment as over time, kind of this positive protective effect of being in treatment, other than that reduced. So, and not only pharmacological interventions, also kind of more comprehensive psychosocial interventions like therapeutic communities in prison settings have shown to reduce reoffending post-release for inmates. So I'm already coming to an end. Just want to say that, you know, if you are looking out for information on evidence-based treatment of drug use disorders, UNODC and WHO, we have produced these international standards for treatment of drug use disorders, and there is a chapter in kind of criminal justice involved people, and also in terms of treatment and care for people with drug use disorders in contact with the criminal justice system. There's another specific handbook jointly produced by the two agencies, especially looking at alternatives to conviction or punishment. And what's upcoming or partly already available, we have done mappings on treatment and care in prison settings and treatment and care as alternatives to conviction or punishment based on member state information. And we hope that, and then following and taking into account also the model strategies that you will develop in general, we hopefully next year will come up with more information on qualified alternatives from pre-arrest to post-sentencing for the special population of people with drug use disorders in contact with criminal justice system. And just as we had a previous speaker from Kenya, also just to say that currently on this health justice interaction, we have started pilots both in Kenya and Nigeria. And with that, thank you so very much, and back to you, Valerie.
Thank you very much, Anya. This was indeed very interesting. Thank you for making the link between effective treatment of drug use disorders and reducing reoffending, and before that, reducing contacts with criminal justice system. Thank you, Anya. A very good conclusion to that workshop. And now, dear speakers, dear participants, if you would agree to turn on your cameras, we would take a group photo, and this is for our report on the side event. So if you want to be on that photo, and we would welcome that, please turn on your cameras. It will not take long. Jamie, are you taking the photo?
I think my colleague Yasmin is. Maybe we can do a little wave. Yasmin, I think we are good, right? In any case. Okay, thank you very much. I think we're done with the photo, Valerie.
Thank you very much again for your participation as speakers, as participants, and personally I found this event extremely rich in new insights, and I hope we can translate that or reflect that in the model strategies. Thank you again.
Bye-bye, everyone, and thank you very much to our speakers.
Thank you.